Hey, welcome Squanchers to your preview for the action that will transpire here in week 3 of the League of Extremely Squanchy Gentlemen. What I'm going to do is go over the basics of each matchup, like who's facing who, the current records, the stakes, and by that I mean like, Cody versus Mike, Dave versus Will, stuff like that. And then what I'm going to do, last year I think I just did one player. I'm going to highlight 3, like what I think are like key matchups or like 3 players that could help decide the victory either by losing the person in the game or winning the person in the game. And just essentially how it will affect the outcome of the game. So anyway, let's dive into the action that's going to come soon, this Sunday. So anyway, the first matchup, as always, I start with myself. So we got Lance versus David. A guy who cares too much and a guy who at times seems like he could care less. It's a scenario CBS would order to pilot in a heartbeat. Lance travels into Tavur territory this Sunday. I'll tell you, he is cruising for a bruising. I hope so. Anyway, so the first 3 players I have for Lance are, the first one I have is Cam Newton. So this week, the Panthers get the Saints at home in what should be most likely a get-right game. Last year was abysmal for Cam, considering the year before they were on the cusp of winning a Super Bowl. Remember, during the offseason, Cam had surgery to repair a partially torn rotator cuff in his throwing shoulder. So I did a little bit of research, right, as a layman to general medical knowledge. But so the rotator cuff is a group of muscles and tendons that form a cuff over the shoulder joint. These muscles and tendons hold the arm in its joint and help the shoulder joint to move. The tendons can be torn from overuse or injury, like sometimes painters get this injury, carpenters, quarterbacks get this injury because of the constant throwing motion and stuff like that. The rotator cuff repair surgery is to repair a torn tendon in the shoulder, and that's the surgery that he underwent. The procedure can be done with a large open incision or with shoulder arthroscopy, which uses small buttonhole-sized incisions. So typically the recovery time is about 4 to 6 months, right, depending on the severity. He had his surgery at the end of March. The stories written about it were about March 30th. So that puts the timeline of his recovery right at when it seems he would be professionally cleared to play, like right at the start of the season, right? So he hasn't been great, right? He's been sailing passes. The issue could still be lingering because he sailed a few passes these past 2 Sundays, He even suffered a minor ankle injury this past Sunday against the Bills. However, if there was a game to watch to see if Cam can still be legit, it's this one. Even without Greg Olsen, Cam should still be able to have his way with the Saints. Because let's look into this. Despite the preseason hope, the Saints defense currently ranks last in the league in total defense at 512.5 yards allowed per game. They're ranked last against the pass with 388.5 yards per game, and they're 31st in points allowed per game at 32.5. So I would say
your music's bad and you should feel bad.
Look for Cam Newton to possibly look like Cam Newton this coming Sunday. Another interesting wrinkle to this is to remember, after Cam Newton got that concussion last year, he stopped rushing altogether. And that was a big part of his game, and that's what opened up the passing game and stuff like that. So does he continue that this weekend? I don't know. Maybe something's wrong there. I don't know. But it is sort of a large gray area to ask whatever happened to the rushing and should the rushing continue. Anyway. Next player, Jamison Crowder. The slot receiver for the Washington professional football team seems to go with the flow of the team. If Cousins is clicking, so is he. If he isn't, then Crowder can be a pariah for your lineup. While they've struggled in their last 2 matchups, Cousins and company should course correct in what should be a shootout with the Raiders. So looking into this a little bit deeper, in 2016, when Crowder was targeted 7 or more times, he produced solid fantasy numbers, with the average from those games coming out to 13.5 fantasy points. Now, I just looked at these were 7 games in which he was targeted 7 or more times. That isn't to say, as I would point out, in 2 games, he had less than 5 targets but scored touchdowns, so he was still had double-digit fantasy points. I just wanted to point out the games that he had 7 or more as that shows that when he does get volume, he produces. And this should be a shootout this Sunday with the Raiders.
Okay.
Good is the enemy of great, and that is what the Raiders' defense is. Last week, they gave up a pair of touchdowns to Jermaine Kearse, and the week before that, it came down to the wire with the Titans. So just, imagine the Titans, but more explosive. That's Washington. And each member of the team should be fantasy relevant in primetime. So then now we have the Ravens defense. What is there really to say? The Ravens defense is awesome. All right, I'm done. Just kidding. They currently lead the league in total tackles. They allowed the fewest total yards of any defense. They demolished the Bengals at home, although with a new defensive coordinator now in Cincy, you have to wonder, and devoured a competent Browns squad in Baltimore. Let's just go down the line here for clarity. All right. Terrell Suggs, circa 2003, is ranked 10th among all outside linebackers. And Tyrus Bowser, the rookie, is ranked 22nd. How do you get so lucky? Brandon Williams is number 4 among defensive tackles. C.J. Mosley is 10th among inside linebackers. Jimmy Smith is 20th among quarterbacks. And safety Tony Jefferson is 21st. This isn't including the addition of Brandon Carr in the offseason. And this squad is stacked with talent. Looking at the Jaguars here, I'm almost salivating if it wasn't, against me. Of course, it would be if these were the same old Jaguars we've come to expect. The team looks committed to turning Fournette into a bulldozer and limiting the amount of attempts Bortles gets at all costs, especially since his first option is out for the season. Dave. They had the chance to punish the Jags and put up great points this weekend. But even if they don't, it's hard to see how the Jags might even put together 100 total yards against this elite defensive presence. So on the other side of the matchup, we have David. First player, Doug Baldwin. Yeah, I know. What are you thinking here? Look, I know that the Seahawks have gotten off to a slow start, but hey, that's what they do. In fact, if you look at the last 5 seasons and do a first half, second half split, the numbers look like this. In the first 8 games, they're 25, 14, and 1, with 21.9 points per game and a 169-point differential. In the final 8 games, they're 31 and 9, with 28.1 points scored per game, with a plus 532-point differential. While I understand that based off of these numbers, they haven't quite crossed their scoring prime meridian, but this game is a perfect opportunity to have a good game during the sluggish start. They're at home. They're hosting the Titans defense that has allowed 3 touchdowns and the 5th most PPR points to wideouts this season. Their defense has also surrendered an average of 15.9 points to opposing number 1 receivers. What I would say is look for Baldwin to prove the haters wrong this week. All right, on to Martavis Bryant. Bryant showed off his speed last week at home and found the end zone. Right! While the Steelers won't be at home this week, they will be facing a Bears defense that is already missing key pieces just 3 weeks into the season. They currently rank 26th among defenders when it comes to the pass, giving up an average of over 250 yards. All of the Steelers should have a field day on Sunday, and Ben should most likely air out a few to Bryant. I mean, it's not crazy to think that. Finally, Zach Ertz. What can I say? Zach Ertz has been amazing. Wentz has been relying on his tight end so far this year, hitting him with 8 to 10 targets respectively through the first 2 games of the season. This weekend, the Eagles face the struggling Giants, whose defense has allowed an average of almost 19 fantasy points to tight ends this year. Whew, I am ready. And that concludes the matchup between Lance and David. Who's going to win? I mean, I don't have a bias here, but I like that David guy. I like that guy to win the game. So the next matchup that we have here is Cody versus Mike. Some of you might be thinking, why isn't this the game of the week? But you'll see. Just hold on. Just keep it in your pants. All right. Tell me if you've heard this one before. Mike is undefeated. He casually talks about how good his team is doing. He humble brags until the cows come home. Whoever is challenging him that week is either talking shit or being hyped up by the rest of the league. It's a familiar story. But this week has added an extra wrinkle. Cody has started 2-0 this season, and he's let us know about it. He's looking to stomp through Mike's team this week. He has vowed to be victorious. While Mike hasn't responded in any meaningful way, as to be expected, the implications of a Cody victory could be staggering. So, let's start with Cody. Leonard Fournette. Just go back and listen to my Ravens DST talk, okay? I mean, Leonard Fournette could do good. I didn't feel like writing one for this. He could be great. He could put up a goose egg. The one thing I would say is, last week, in a game that was way out of hand, they still threw him in the game, and he still ran in for the touchdown, giving him double-digit fantasy points. So if that's an indication of they're not afraid to give it to him, even in garbage time, I don't know what is. Anyway, on to LaShawn McCoy. Penetration, and not the good kind. That is the name of the game for LaShawn this week as he faces the Broncos at home. I say this because that is how the Broncos dismantled Ezekiel Elliott and the Cowboys last week. Penetration can play tricks with the eyes of a running back, causing him to either misread his blocking or come off of the intended point of attack sooner than he wants to. So for example, Von Miller lined up as the edge man on the line of scrimmage, a position that traditionally has contain on the play. When he reads the stretch run his way, though, his primary goal becomes getting penetration, and the linebacker scrapes over the top to play contain. Miller forces Ezekiel to stop his feet in the backfield, one of the biggest no-nos of outside zone runs, and the result is a tackle for a loss. The Broncos got penetration on the edge every time the Cowboys ran outside zone. The other way to shut down a running game like the Cowboys is to simply put more people in the box than the offense can account for. On all 9 of Elliott's carries, the Broncos had more defenders line up within 8 yards of the line of scrimmage than the Cowboys had run blockers. All the defense needs to do at that point is send the running back into the gap of the unaccounted for defender, and it's a stop for the defense. The Broncos forced Dak Prescott to beat them, and it paid off. Did I mention how good the corners are too? In any case, if this plan could very well copy and paste into this game, and it could be a tough day for McCoy. Finally, A.J. Green. With the addition of a new offensive coordinator and Green not being quite quiet about his frustration with his current situation, he should have a bounce-back game against the Packers this Sunday. While Green Bay only ranks 11th in total passing yards given up, that ranking becomes a little more glaring when you see that they rank 5th among total attempts. That means that teams are able to gain a significant amount of yards through the air on them without necessarily having to attempt a high volume of passes. The Packers have also allowed 15 touchdowns on pass attempts that go for 15 yards or more. That's the most since last year. So what I would say is, look for the Red Rifle to reload and pepper Green with targets in this one. Oh yeah, and free Joe Mixon! So anyway, on the flip side, looking towards Mike. Let's look at Carlos Hyde. Hyde showed last week that he deserved to be mentioned among the best fantasy running backs in the league, rushing for 124 yards against the Seahawks in Seattle. This week, he'll be playing the Rams, who have allowed the most rushing yards, 3 total scores, and the 5th most PPR points to opposing runners so far this year. While a majority of those numbers are going into these rankings come from last week's outing against Washington, Hyde is a talented enough running back to show that perhaps the Rams' running stopping woes were not just an aberration last week. Matthew Stafford, Goatford. Stafford is coming off a lackluster performance, but really it was way more the game script rather than the player himself. He will be at home this week against an Atlanta defense that will be without their key linebacker Vic Beasley. While the Detroit defense is potent, the Atlanta offense is no slouch. This game could easily turn into a shootout, and if so, Stafford could easily go get you a nice 30-plus fantasy scoring day. Easily! Come on! Matt Goatford, Matt Goat. I'm not sure how Dave did that. I know Goat's in there twice, but anyway. Davante Adams. In years past, it was Jordy Nelson's absence that provided the argument for Davante Adams becoming fantasy relevant. But now, it's a combination of injuries. Jordy is, quote, trending in the right direction to play versus the Bengals on Sunday, says the coaching staff. But that should be monitored closely. He could easily tweak something, or the coaching staff could decide to rest him to avoid any further injury. The other factor here is the reemergence of Randall Cobb. Not to be forgotten, as he couldn't be the guy in Jordy's absence, he has had a renaissance this season. That is, until he got injured in last week's game. Now, having not practiced on Wednesday, it's not looking too good for him, especially since it was initially called a shoulder injury, and now he's being held out of practice with a chest injury. So Javonte Adams should have a decent game this week, given these factors, and that will result in targets that need to go somewhere. Why not Davante Adams? Maybe Geronimo Allison. I don't know. I'd pass it to him. It's a cool last name. So that concludes Cody versus Mike. I'm not too sure who's going to win this one, to be honest. Actually, I am sure. I just don't want to say it out loud because I don't want that to backfire on me, and then I won't hear the end of it. Moving on to Victor versus Dom. Oh, goodness. You know, it feels like just yesterday these two were duking it out in the gutters to not be the worst loser. Good times. Good times. What a difference a season makes. The difference today is that while Dom has continued his strong run to repeat that Suck Bowl championship, Victor, with his fuck it lineup, has come out the gate to a 2-0 start. Not what anyone expected. Not what anyone asked for, to be certain. For Victor, we start with Mike Gillislee. Hey you, remember how LeGarrette Blount was on New England last year? Well, I swear I'm saying things, because it looks like he's there again. Wait. Okay, it's a new guy named Gillislee. Seriously though, although Gillislee has had great fantasy production this year, like most people thought, it has been seriously touchdown dependent. It sort of depends on how you think Patriot games are going to go. If you think the Patriots are ever going to be 5 yards out of the end zone, then sure, start them. If not, then don't. It should be that easy, right? In any case, with a Texans defense that has a suspended Brian Cushing, a banged-up J.J. Watt, both its top corners likely to be out, and the history of Patriots owning them, it's looking to be a fantasy feast for all the Patriots on Sunday, not just Gillislee. The bright, shiny new addition of Javorius Allen. Last year, he was a hot pickup and went nowhere. This year, Allen is a hot pickup, and hey look, he's doing something! He's doing something! Any articles by beat reporters in the Baltimore area will tell you how Allen has gotten into better shape and honed his skills as a pass catcher. This comes at no surprise then, as with Woodhead's absence, he has just slid right into the PPR DMs. He leads the Ravens in both backfield snaps at 75 and touches at 40, and he'll continue to see work when the team travels to London to face the Jaguars. While the defense is improved, this unit has allowed an average of almost 23 PPR fantasy points to backs. Another wrinkle to this is Terrence West's injury. He did not practice yesterday or today, citing an injury in his thigh. So keep an eye out, because if he makes a trip to London, and even if so, whether he suits up or not, all signs could be pointing north for Allen's big day. Get it? That was a play on the last name of West? Okay, whatever. So now we're on to Golden Tate. I've decided to do something a little bit different this year. While not in Victor's starting lineup, I thought I would make the case for why you should be putting Golden Tate in there, you disrespectful son of a bitch. Since the beginning of last season, the Falcons are allowing more than 110 yards per game to slot receivers. No other team is allowing even 90 yards per game. So I'll take that volume against Atlanta every frickin' day of the week, and considering that Tate leads the league in routes run since joining the Lions in 2014. He also leads the team in targets and completions already, and he has top 10 potential this week in what's most likely going to be a shootout in Detroit. Anyway, moving on. For Dom, we'll start with Alshon Jeffrey. Look, I know what you guys are expecting. I'm going to have some sort of obvious subversion of what I'm doing here, where I stop with the serious stuff and I shit on someone's decisions. If you think I'm some sort of 2-bit hack, prepare to be totally stoked. This is with the assumption that Janoris Jenkins plays, since that's the expectation since I'm writing this. Since the start of last season, the Giants have allowed the second lowest completion rate to wide receivers, both overall at 56.3% and on passes of 15-plus yards downfield at 31.9%. Wentz has 640 yards passing this season, and yet just 130 of them have gone to Jeffrey. Wentz has been spreading it around, and I'm not sure that changes Sunday given the coverage that Jeffrey should get. Shitty-ass decision, you shitter. Shitty shit. Okay, back to the serious stuff. Let's look at Jarvis Landry. Okay, back to the serious stuff. Okay, so Jarvis Landry never scores. Maybe not never, but it seems like that. But that may change, as the Jets have allowed the fourth most yards per catch to slot receivers, that's at 12.6, and the fifth most slot touchdowns at 12, since the start of last season. You were already using Landry in points per reception leagues. That's the one we're in. But, I mean, just keep using him. You should be good. Come on now. And finally, we'll end with Carson Palmer. You got to give Palmer props this week, pretty much by default. Despite a lackluster start to the season, showing off his age, the Dallas secondary is decimated by injury. No, when I say decimated, let me give you some idea of the situation. So Chidobe Awuzie, cornerback, didn't practice. Nolan Carroll, cornerback, didn't practice. Orlando Scandrick, cornerback. Limited participant, but it's really not looking too good to be playing Monday. Arjen Kolkuhan, cornerback, did not practice. Trevor Siemian looked like John Elway last Sunday afternoon, and Palmer has speedy receivers in Brown and Nelson who can clearly take advantage of the situation against Dallas. I think Palmer has a pretty big day. I think it's looking pretty good. All right. So now we have Jibba versus Steven. Well, it's Jibba versus Steven.
Yeah.
All right. For Jibba, we'll start with Alex Smith. He's going to become Alex Smith that we all know and get agitated by eventually, but so far, he's playing past his expectations. I think you should look for him to continue this weekend. He should be usable once again this week against a Chargers team that he has had at least 13.4 fantasy points against in every game since joining Kansas City in 2013. He scored 52.68 total points last season in 2 games against the Bolts, so he kind of has their number. Let's look at the Patriots defense. They aren't an elite fantasy defense by any means. They don't really turn the ball over or get you any sacks, but the Patriots bend more often than they break, and consistency is nice to have. That should continue this weekend. So far, Houston's defensive opponents have scored an average of 17.5 fantasy points against them. There's also that whole, Bill Belichick thing. Just throwing that out there. And my final player for Jibba is Raiders wide receivers. I don't know. One of them will catch a touchdown. They're both. Someone will do something. Look, I didn't feel like doing a third one. I'm not too enthused about your team, Jibba. This might happen every time I do one of these. Okay, I don't want to be a dick here, but I don't really see any bright spots in your team. And if they are, they're few and far between. All right, I'm just being honest with you. All right, anyway. Steven, C.J. Anderson. So Anderson's coming off a 2-touchdown performance, right, against the Cowboys, and his snap percentage set at 71% and touches at 49 totals indicate that he's used as a true featured back. I'd keep him in your starting lineup, Steven, because the Bills have surrendered an average of almost 28 PPR points per game to running backs on their home field since last season. Let's go to Russell Wilson. So let me make the case against starting Russell Wilson here, all right? With limited protection, it shouldn't be surprising that Wilson has completed just 57.9% of his passes against the blitz. That's 19th since 2015. It's not just the offensive line struggles, but potentially being without Jimmy Graham, and even if he is hobbled, doesn't help, and you can't ignore his road struggles, with 19.1% fewer fantasy points per game on the road since 2015. A slow starter, as I pointed out earlier in the Baldwin section, Wilson has averaged 14.32 points per game in September the the past 3 seasons, but has averaged 19.82 points per game from October on. So like I said in the Baldwin part earlier, patience must be had with the Seahawks. That's why, personally, I would roll the dice on Kaiser this week with a soft matchup in Indianapolis, then Wilson on the road. Finally, Le'Veon Bell. It's a get-right game. Should be good. Yeah. Look, I'm doing this late at night. I don't feel like doing every single player. All right. Some of these guys require deep dive, and I'm not in the mood for that right now. Anyway, here we go. Here is your game of the week. Dave versus Will. This matchup is our game of the week, and it's sponsored by Blackstone Bear Droppings. Are you struggling to lose weight? Have all of the mainstream weight loss methods failed you? Have you found Kinobody to be utter bullshit? Well, look no further than Blackstone Bear Droppings. Our portioned servings of Second Harvest provide you the fats, proteins, and vitamins needed to optimize your body's potential. Now, back to the game. So let me take you in my time machine here. If you guys remember, last year, the Cousins didn't meet until week 8 in the season. Will at this time was 4-3, and Dave was 3-4. Dave was right outside of Suck Bowl contention, while Will was on the cusp of climbing the ladder into the top 3. If you remember, Will defeated Dave that day 120 to 109.5 with an impressive 30-point showing from Amari Cooper, leading his balanced point scoring from the rest of his team. That defeat sent Dave's toe-sucking dreams into the gutter, while that win propelled Will as he managed to win his next 4 games in a row. As Bob Dylan would say, all the times they be changing, or however that song goes. So in a complete 180 now, Dave holds all the cards. Will is staring at an 0-2 situation, and it feels like he can't afford to lose this week. So on that note, we'll start with Will. And we'll start with Isaiah Crowell. He has had a disappointing start to the season, to say the least. This should be a good week for Crowell, though, as the Colts' run defense hasn't necessarily been bad, holding Todd Gurley to 2.1 yards per carry and the Cardinals' backups to 3.5 yards. But those were some awful offensive lines. The Browns have one of the decent ones, ranking as the 14th best run-blocking unit. This should also be a low-scoring game, where the Browns can afford to give Crowell plenty of carries rather than the 10 he dealt with last week. Now we'll go on to Dizzy Dez Bryant. Look, I get it. Dez is the shiny new thing on the block. I just think starting him this week isn't the best thing to do. Patrick Peterson will be taking on Dez this Monday. Peterson, who remember 6'1" and 203 pounds, is one of the few corners who can match up physically with him. This is still a good offensive line despite what we saw last week, and I think the Cowboys look to get their identity back. This passing game isn't as inept as we've seen thus far, but this isn't the week to right the shit, man. Prescott is hurt, and the Cardinals, who have had an elite defense, can just mimic the game plan that the Broncos did to give Dallas fits last week. This whole thing just stinks to me. It just stinks. You know, it's that smell. It's that smelly smell. That smelly smell that smells Desi. Anyway, final roster addition I want to look at for Will is the Eagles' defense. The Eagles' defense, I think, should post a nice stat line this week against the Giants. Over his last 4 starts in Philadelphia, Eli Manning has averaged 235.5 passing yards. It's not too much. With a combined 2 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and 2 fumbles. The Giants have also averaged a mere 10.2 points in those contests. And with the way they're looking recently, I think it's... this will make me sick. Fly! Eagles! Fly! Oh, God. It's disgusting. So on the flip side of the game of the week, we'll look at Dave. We'll start with Charles Clay. So, from 2002 to 2016, there were exactly 2 instances in which a defense generated pressure on at least 34% of dropbacks for a season. That's the 2015 Broncos and, can you guess? The 2016 Broncos. So, why am I bringing that up? Well, since the beginning of last season, Clay's receptions were jumped from 19.1% when Tyrod is not under pressure to 24.6% when he's feeling the heat. The Broncos just got lit up by Jason Witten last week, so I think Charles Clay should have a pretty good game. I don't know. That's just me. Let's move on to Keenan Allen, the feel-good story of the year. Allen has looked no worse for wear after a major knee reconstruction, ranking 6th in PPR points among wideouts while playing on 87% of the Chargers' offensive snaps. His success should most likely continue versus the Chiefs, who have allowed an average of 39.1 PPR points to receivers and the third most points to number ones. And then finally, we'll look at Kelvin Benjamin. Benjamin in the Panthers offense has floundered to start the season, but I'm still starting him against the Saints. And I think Dave is too. Because no team has allowed more PPR points to wideouts, and only the Colts have given up more yards to the position. Furthermore, their defense has surrendered the third most PPR points to number one receivers. If you get anything out of anything I've said today, if your players are playing the Saints, start them. But that will conclude this fantasy preview of the action that'll happen in week 3. And so just to give you a disclaimer, I don't think I'm going to be doing this every week. It's just a combination of, I kind of want to keep this special, to it's actually kind of really more time consuming than I thought. And then 3, it's kind of hard to record myself this long and be in a space where Kayla's not at and she needs silence or the dog's over to something like that, because I have to have the space where there's silence and I can get my voice through. So, and then also a 4th reason I found is that, the more weeks go on, the more data I can collect and hopefully put into this stuff and delve into, So what I'm not going to do one next week, but I'm going to do a preview for week 5. So look out for that. So again, there's going to be a recap each week, but there won't be a preview each week. It'll be every other week. Starting this week, there won't be one for the 4th, and there'll be one on the 5th. But so as your commissioner, I'm signing off. Thank you for joining me this evening, and may the squanch be with you this weekend. Goodbye.